welcome to this episode of the CGIS Brief, where we do a bi-weekly mini deep dive into a subject ranging from traveling during a pandemic to working out abroad. And these tips and tricks can help you prepare for traveling or studying abroad. So we're really excited to get started today. So we're going to just jump right into it. I'm Ashton Troxel, and my preferred pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm an intercultural programs advisor at CGIS.
I am Kelly Rouse. I am the health and safety assistant at CGIS, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
I'm Stephen Gonzalez. I am the communication specialist at CGIS, and my preferred pronouns are he, him, his.
Thank you. And today we have a special guest joining us.
Hi, my name is Michael Jordan. I use the pronouns he, him, his, and I am the director at CGIS.
Today we're talking about food culture, so we're really excited, and we're just going to start off by talking about why this matters to you as a traveler, whether you're just, crossing the border to Canada or going all the way to Japan. These are things you want to start thinking about. One really important thing is food is the way you connect to friends and family and even strangers. So you can take these opportunities to not just get to know the culture and the customs, but also the religion, different rituals that cultures do, and the values and history of the people in the country that you're traveling to. And another consideration that it's a little bit more practical are dietary restrictions. So I have students who are vegan or maybe vegetarian, and they travel to countries where it's not realistic to maintain that diet and stay healthy. So that's something to consider, as well as gender roles in your host country. For example, maybe you identify as a male and you really enjoy cooking, but in the host country, men aren't allowed in the kitchen and only your host mother will be cooking. So I think Mike may go into a little bit more detail about that later. So your identity will play a role in food and cooking abroad. And the last and most important thing, food is delicious. So I'll pass it on to Mike and we'll get into more detail.
Thanks, Ashton. So I have been fortunate enough to travel all over the world over the course of my life. And one of the things that I like best is food. I love eating everywhere that I go. And here when I'm home too, a little bit too much, in fact, but that's another story. Food is a very important part of our identities. It's a way that we can share who we are with other people. It tells each other a lot about everything from where we come from, to what we believe, to what we value. One of the primary identifications that's often associated with food is nationality. The photo on this slide I took in London about 2 years ago. And as you can see, they consider hot dogs, especially a can of ye old American hot dogs, which I'm sure we're all very familiar with, to be the quintessential American food. A lot of countries I've been to around the world definitely think that hot dogs sort of symbolize American cuisine. And, there's a lot of people here in America that love hot dogs and would agree. When you get into it, though, we can go beyond the national level to regional level. What is a hot dog to an American? Well, it depends where you're from. Some people like to put chili and brown mustard on them. Some put sauerkraut, and some sacrilegious people put ketchup on hot dogs, which should never be done, ever. I come from Chicago, so I happen to know that a proper hot dog is actually an all beef Vienna red hot topped with yellow mustard, diced onions, pickle relish, a pickle spear, tomato slices, pickled hot peppers, and celery salt. So now you know that, and you can, henceforth consume a proper hot dog. Clam chowder, is it red or white? Well, it depends where you come from. New England versus Manhattan clam chowder, right? Foods can also cut across national boundaries, right? And regional boundaries. For example, religions are often tied in with culinary habits. A lot of Jews keep kosher. There are many Muslims who follow a halal diet. A lot of Christians might not eat meat on Fridays during Lent. And in some cases, it goes far beyond that. In the Sikh religion, for example, all of their temples or gurdwaras have a communal kitchen called a langar, and it's part of their practice to run these kitchens. It's all volunteer based and all based off of donations, but they run them so that anyone who comes to the temple, regardless of their faith, their race, their caste or social class, everyone will be fed a free vegetarian meal. All are welcome. There's no discrimination. Everyone eats together while sitting on the floor. So in this case, the preparation and serving of food and the consumption of food together, all on the same level, serves to represent that faith's commitment to equality among all people. So food can really be an incredibly important and symbolic part of a faith or a culture beyond simply what we eat. Foods can also indicate our ethnicity. If we look at American cuisine, what you eat might well help people figure out your ethnic background. If you are from a Polish American family and you grow up eating kielbasa and golumpki and bikosh and all of this great food, that becomes part of your ethnic and cultural history, and that's part of how you express who you are. If you're Mexican American and you grow up eating sweet tamales around Christmas time, same thing. If you're eating greens and cornbread, right? That might be an indication that you're from the South or you're coming from an African American background. Food really reflects our history and who we are. It can also be an indication of social status. Are we drinking fine wines or Natty Light, right? Please don't drink Natty Light. If you're going to drink beer, drink good beer. Natty Light is not beer. But in any case, are we eating hamburger or filet mignon? There are different associations with what we eat as well that talk about our position within society. Beyond that, the way that we eat can reveal a lot about what we value in our society, traditions that we have, beliefs that we hold. Something that Ashton referred to earlier is who prepares the food. This ties into gender roles, as she mentioned earlier. That actually happened to me. I spent a year in Spain when I was in college and lived with a host family. My host family was about a 65-year-old widow, so it was just she and I living in the house. And I love to cook, always have. At that point, I loved to cook. And there was no way she was going to let me into the kitchen at all, ever, not even to watch her prepare the dishes. According to her, men did not belong in the kitchen. So she would prepare the meals, put them on a little cart that would squeak. She rolled it down the hall and serve it to me and then wheel it away. And I never got to see how she made these things, which is a shame because I would love to be cooking those right now and can never duplicate them. That can also differ who prepares the food if we're talking about whether it's in a private home or in a public place. Who gets to cook in restaurants? Is it men or is it women? A lot of times you will see where women are the only ones who can cook within the home, but men are the only ones allowed to work out of the home, for example, as cooks or chefs. So a lot can tie into gender roles, class roles, et cetera, based on who has access to the food, who prepares it, who does the shopping, et cetera. We think that we know how to eat, of course. And at the most basic level, we do. You chew up and swallow food. But if you think about everything that surrounds it, when do we eat? Where do we eat? With whom? There's a lot that's very culturally dependent. Some cultures are very into going out and eating out in restaurants. And you'll see that a lot. Just a couple of years ago, I read that in America, in the United States, for the first time, about 2 years ago, Americans spent more eating out at restaurants than they did at grocery stores. So in our country, we're actually eating out more than we are preparing our own foods at home. I don't know exactly how they determine that, probably, spending patterns, but it doesn't surprise me given what I've seen happening in society over the past, decade or so. In some cultures, however, it's very rare to go eat out, and you would only do so for special occasions. Where do we eat? In some cultures, it's very acceptable to buy and eat food on the street. In others, you would never eat something while walking down the street. That would just be considered the height of rudeness, right? With whom? Do families all eat together? Do men and women eat separately? Are kids fed beforehand and then adults eat later? Are there places where you just sit down next to random strangers and eat, right? In the Gurdwaras that I mentioned, the Sikh temples earlier, everyone sits down on the floor along these long carpets and eats together. You're eating next to strangers that could be from any walk of life, right? And there's a message in that that's intentional. Even when we eat, going back to Spain, since I lived there, a lot of Americans are shocked when they show up and find out that you eat a very light breakfast in the morning before you go out to school or to work. The main meal isn't until 2 p.m., and that's a multi-course meal where everyone sits down together, families eat together whenever possible. And dinner, an early dinner would be 10 p.m. Sometimes you're not eating dinner until midnight. Very, very different than the schedule that we follow here. So don't assume that you already know when and where and how you'll be eating when you're going abroad. Look into these things before you go, and think about why. You know, why are things different from one country to the next? Then what rules apply about eating in a given society? You know, this can come down to anything from, it can include things like table manners, right? In China, for example, if people have food waste like bones, if you've got a bunch of chicken bones, people will put them right on the tablecloth next to you, or next to them, next to their plate. Which, if someone had a big pile of leftover detritus on their plate here, they might get a little bit of side eye, right? It doesn't look sanitary or doesn't look good. In other countries, there's rules about how you hold your fork and your knife and which you use, right? In Thailand, typically the fork is just used to push stuff onto your spoon and the spoon goes in your mouth. There are rules with chopsticks if you're in Asian countries about which end that goes in your mouth, and you have to use the other end if you're taking something off a communal plate. You never stick your chopsticks vertically into a bowl of rice because that looks like an offering for the dead. So there are a lot of little things, little rules that we have to learn about each place that we go. So food in general is a fascinating view into any given culture. It shows us who we are, how we see each other. You know, in Ethiopia, for example, it's considered good manners for the host to, first of all, everyone eats off of a communal plate. You don't have individual plates, and that plate is usually covered in injera, which is a large, round, spongy bread that you tear off and use instead of utensils to carry the food to your mouth. And the host or hostess will often take a bite of that in their own hand and feed it to their guests. And if you can imagine that happening at a dinner party here, that would be seen as non-standard, to say the least. In Senegal, again, you sit on the floor around a communal tray of food. Everyone's got their own spoon, and you're eating from the same basic plate. So there really are a lot of differences in how we consume our food, and it's really fascinating to think about what that says about us. What do we eat? How do we eat it? When and where and with whom do we eat it? And why? Why do we follow these rules? Is it religious? Is it a regional thing? Are we doing it for ethical reasons? For example, not eating meat, or for health reasons? Are we following specific diets? There's a lot that you can find out about individuals and also about cultures in general by just observing traditions around food.
Mike, I have a question for you, actually.
Sure.
What advice would you give someone traveling to a country for the first time who is trying to, learn these rules and adapt to them, maybe get out of their comfort zone if they have to maybe eat with their hands, if they're not used to that?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, even if you just Google, food customs or eating habits in whatever country or location you're going to, you'll start to learn a lot. If you can, then follow up by asking someone who is from there or who has been there, just to double check. A lot for years, for my whole life, I've heard that like belching is a sign, is a compliment to the chef in China, right? Now, I've been to China just a few times. I've never personally witnessed that. So I asked one of our colleagues who's lived in Taiwan and traveled throughout China and Asia extensively, and he said he's never seen that. So he's heard it as well, but he's never seen it. So it's always good to check up on these things. Finally, you can also, if there are movies or anything like that, or books that depict eating, check them out as well. Just try and inform yourself. And then if it involves a skill that you have to develop, like eating with your hands or using chopsticks, then go ahead and practice before you go so that you don't look, foolish once you start, or at least like a novice, not foolish. It's always good to try and emulate the local customs, even if at first it's a little bit hard to get used to.
Yeah, I think practicing is a good tip, because before I went to India, I would use like both hands to like rip my bread apart, but you're only supposed to use one hand. And eventually I got really good at tearing the bread apart and eating with just one hand. But
Yeah,
it
no,
took,
that's
several
that's
tries
an
before
important
I
part.
got.
In a lot of India and in the Middle East, in cultures where you eat with your hands, you're only supposed to use your right hand because your left hand is used for cleaning yourself after you go to the bathroom.
That's right.
So you do not want to reach in and grab something with that hand because, well, for obvious reasons. So that's a very good point. Thanks, Ashton.
Mm-hmm.
If you would like to see just a few fun movies that center completely around food, these are some that I recommend. Tampopo is a Japanese film about the quest for the perfect bowl of ramen. And it combines all these different genres, from the Western to kind of philosophical ponderings on the nature of perfection. Like Water for Chocolate is a magic realism film set in Mexico. Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, I think was directed by Ang Lee. I'm not sure though. And The Lunchbox is this sort of rom-com type deal about a couple in India who meet each other over mistaken lunches, kind of bento type lunchbox delivery stuff. They're all really good. I know that Thanksgiving's coming up, so if you've got some time and want to indulge in some foreign films that are going to make you extremely hungry, I definitely recommend these.
Yeah. So I am going to talk to you guys a little bit about health and safety while eating abroad. And so it's always important to be thinking about health and safety in the context of foreign countries. When you think about how we take advantage a lot of the times of the health and safety standards and regulations that we have here in the US, those don't necessarily exist in the same way in other countries. And also there's just the fact that you are literally traveling like far, far away. And the bacteria in the food and things like that is going to be different as well. So there are reasons you may potentially get sick. But here is a couple tips on how to actually avoid getting sick in the first place. So one thing you want to do is make sure you wash your hands before and after eating. You want to eat freshly and thoroughly cooked food that is still hot. And also be cautious of street food. Now, I know a lot of people love street food and love trying street food in foreign countries. It's just important to be thinking about it strategically. So one thing you want to be mindful of, has the food been sitting out for a while? Maybe it isn't a very popular stall and they've just kind of kept the same stuff under a hot lamp and it's been kind of a while and you're not really sure how long it's been there. Maybe be a little bit cautious and go to a place that's more better trafficked, particularly if you see a lot of locals are going to those. That's a good idea, or like a good indicator that this is a place that is going to have safe food, and also the locals like it, so why don't you try it too? So a couple things to avoid when we're thinking about foods is uncooked foods, especially if you can't peel or shell them yourself. So when we're thinking about fruits and vegetables, thinking, for example, an orange, you peel that yourself. Okay, so that's going to be a pretty safe food to eat. But apples, unless you're funky and you like to peel off your apple peel, you're generally going to eat it peel and all. And the big thing is that you may be receiving apples that have been washed in contaminated water. If this is an area of the world where they don't have the same water purification systems all around that we do. And so it can be important to be kind of making that distinction. Fish and shellfish can be a little bit dicey sometimes. So it's good to be kind of, cautious around eating it, especially when you're coming in contact with uncooked food that's particularly hazardous. Now, if you're in Japan and, you're going to a nice restaurant and like everyone is eating lots of shellfish and food, or that's, potentially like uncooked fish and stuff like that with sushi, then yeah, that's probably much more of like a cultural thing that you can be like, I could probably take the risk. But in other countries, it may be more advised to kind of like take a little bit of a stock of whether you think it's safe. Unpasteurized food is also something to take into consideration. Generally, Americans, we're eating our milk and, dairy products like that. They've all been pasteurized. And so we don't really encounter unpasteurized foods very often, but keeping an eye out for, what is unpasteurized is a good idea, because to know it hasn't gone through that like secondary process, to try to make sure it's not going to infect you with anything. Next slide. Awesome. So what happens if you actually do get sick? So this is sometimes an inevitability, especially if you're in a country that's really, really different from the US. I know we joke with students who like go to this like rural place in Tanzania and things like that. And we're like, you're probably all going to get traveler's diarrhea, or like the majority of you guys are. And it's just because it's a very, very different part of the world. There are very different kind of like standards that like you're going to be having, bottled water that you drink out of instead of, just the regular tap and things like that. So what do you do if you actually do get sick? Drink lots of fluid, especially if you have diarrhea. Please drink fluids. And then also think about taking some over-the-counter medications to kind of ease your symptoms. Especially think about potentially bringing some of that medication with you if you're unsure of what kind of medication is going to be available in country, if you're really preferential towards a certain kind. And also, if it's longer lasting or more serious, go to the doctor and talk to them about whether you should get antibiotics. I know there are some places where you can get antibiotics over the counter. Please do not self-prescribe yourself that. And make sure you talk to a doctor and see if it really is serious enough for that. We don't want to be taking antibiotics unnecessarily, but in some situations, it is going to help you out.
And I would just add that if something's been going on for a few days, or whenever you think it might be a problem, it's better to go early to a doctor or to someone that can help you than to wait, because something that's relatively minor and easy to take care of, if you catch it early, if you leave it, can become something a lot more serious. You could dehydrate yourself, or, there's all kinds of things that could happen. So better to be on the proactive side of things, even if it is a little embarrassing to go tell people about your bowels. You'll get over that pretty quickly.
And I would definitely say, like, do not think that just because maybe you're going to a fancy Western, European country, that you're not going to get, traveler's diarrhea there too. I think Ashton was mentioning that, she went to France and she went to India at different times. She got sick in France and not in India. So, you can't necessarily stereotype that like, I'm going to get sick in this place and I'm not going to get sick here. It can kind of be, luck of the draw with that kind of situation.
I didn't get sick the whole time I was in India, and then I came back here and went out to eat, and I was so sick from eating in the US. So always be prepared no matter where you're traveling.
Yeah.
All right. So for taking action today, we're going to be talking about your budget and how you can maximize every single penny that you have by following a few simple tips and tricks. So first, you're going to want to start assessing how much money you'll have for your time abroad And make sure that you're taking the currency exchange into consideration, as the US dollar value can vary depending on which country you're in. Keep in mind that cost of living in these countries is most likely going to be more expensive than what you're used to. And that's just not abroad, right? So if you're choosing to study abroad in a metropolis city, cost of living will most likely be pretty expensive versus maybe Thailand, or in Callie's case, she chose the Czech Republic because it was going to be pretty inexpensive for her. So you're just going to want to take a look at more in depth at the country that you're planning on traveling to. And then the one thing you'd probably least expect to come from budgeting is that it can really help maximize your experience abroad, but that will require some flexibility and keeping an open mind on your end. And what I mean by that is really getting to know your local host community. I was reading several articles when preparing for this, and I found one article written by Discover that they did on professional travelers and budgeting. And some of the few tips that they had for finding affordable foods were avoiding tourist traps and speaking to locals like baristas, bartenders, maybe your dorm coordinators, local classmates, and anybody else that you feel comfortable asking, just really asking, where can you go for some good quality food on a budget? One thing that was mentioned in this article, though, was don't really speak to hotel concierges because they don't necessarily have your best interest in mind when it comes to recommendations. So maybe skip them. But yeah, all right. So moving on to the next slide, we're just going to talk a little bit about a few tips. So definitely start rethinking your definition of what fine dining is. This idea that great dining automatically means gourmet food and expensive wine is very old school. You do not need to spend a lot of money to have a great meal, and that's not just abroad, that's here in the country as well. Second, have lunch instead of dinner at your splurge restaurant. If you're trying to save money on food while you travel, note that lunch menus tend to have lower prices, often for just slightly smaller portions than the same dishes you'd find on the dinner menu. But because they're affordable, you might be able to purchase one or more items. When I was going through this with the team, I had suggested, leftovers, and Callie had made a good point to know about leftover culture, and really like knowing whether or not it's actually a thing in your host country. The more I thought about it, I actually don't ever recall taking leftovers home when I've gone abroad. So definitely like feel it out, ask maybe when you're asking your local barista about taking leftovers, but that's definitely an option too. And then opt for cafes over more formal restaurants. A lot of times cafes will have cheaper food than these higher end restaurants. Going the cafe route will definitely go a long way when eating on a budget. And then grab some groceries. So visit a local supermarket or a farmer's market to pick up ingredients for, simple foods that you can make. Obviously, you're going to want, depending on what your accommodations are going to be like, you're definitely going to want to assess your kitchen access. Definitely, know if you're going to have pots or access to pots and pans and things like that, so that you can cook for yourself most of the week, and then maybe treating yourself at the end of the, maybe on the weekend out with your friends. And then eat light and share. Ordering an appetizer in place of an entree, or splitting an entree between two people is another good way to save money. I know a lot of places, like when you think about Spain and tapas, right? You can order a lot and just share these small portions with everyone. That way you get a little taste of everything. That's definitely my favorite part about Spain, is just the tapas, not just the food, but also this idea of sharing with your friends and family, and this experience. And then something that I never thought about was avoid paying taxes on your food. So one of the ways that you can do this is by signing up for peer-to-peer dining programs like Travel Spoon or Bon Appetit. You won't pay taxes or service charges on your meals, but essentially these peer-to-peer programs, they set you up with a local family or a local chef or something like that, and they'll cook for you, and you'll pay like a small fee. An example would be in Urubamba, Peru. It was $10 per person to have, to come to someone's house. It'd be you and maybe like 4 of your close friends on your trip or something. And this person or family would cook for you. Traveling Spoon is really all about connecting travelers to locals who are really eager to share these homemade meals, to share their culture with people, and to pass down culinary traditions. And then Travel Spoon also offers in-home meals with their host. So in addition to that, they also some of them will come with you to these markets, to do like a little walkthrough of all the local foods that are being offered. So that's just kind of like an added on bonus. If you want to sign up for something like that, a local will take you on a tour of the local grocery stores or markets to kind of help you look for food that's going to be, easy for you to prepare. And then buying water at the grocery store versus souvenir shops, man, this is one of the biggest cons out there when it comes to traveling. And I know we see this a lot in airports. Usually all these things are very expensive, especially water. That can be like $5 a bottle. So instead of buying a bottle of water at a souvenir shop, or even, it would be more economical for you to go to your local grocery store and get some water. And then Callie also had a fun suggestion, learn how to say still water in your local language, so you don't get charged for water in a restaurant, because sometimes they'll try to stick you with some bubbly water and you didn't even ask for it. So keep that in mind. And then lastly, keep snacks in your backpack. Carry something to nibble on throughout the day, like fruits or nuts or baguettes. Whenever you're out about, walking from class to home or wherever you're at. Keeping snacks with you is definitely helpful, so that when you go out to eat, you're actually you're not starving, and you'll just eat light, and you won't even have to spend as much as you would if you were dying from hunger, basically. And then lastly, we're going to share out these slides, but I highly encourage you to click here for more tips right there at the bottom. There's a few more helpful tips for you to help you travel on a budget. So, yeah.
I think I should start carrying a baguette around in my purse, just pull it out whenever I get hungry.
To be fair, I'm a little annoyed that you don't already do that.
So to wrap up, Callie put together a really excellent slide of helpful links. The first one is an app. It is a pay app, but a lot of students have given feedback that it's really helpful if you're looking for vegetarian and vegan restaurants around the world. And then the other resources are really focused on different food restrictions, like if you have a food allergy or you're trying to eat halal. And then there's some links to some general safety tips and traveling with food allergies. And like Stephen said, you'll have access to these slides. So in 2 weeks, we have our last CGIS brief of this fall 2020 term, and we'll be talking about dating and sexual health abroad, also known as international relations or affairs. So please join us at the same link, same time. And that is it for today.